So I'm Jose Wharton. I am originally from Arecibo, Puerto Rico. I am a graduate student in the entrepreneurship program here at the University of Notre Dame. The hurricane was definitely an interesting ordeal. For me specifically, I was in the island while this was happening. I remember we had just gone through Hurricane Irma. I got power back like 2 days before Hurricane Maria, and I was just like, I remember. I lived in San Juan at the moment, and my parents lived in Atillo, which is about an hour west, and they lived in a wooden house. And I remember I was trying to convince them, like, don't stay there, go to my brother's house. Like, his house is in cement, like, you'll be fine there. And they were like, oh, like, since we don't want you to spend the hurricane alone, like, we'll go with you. So they were with me the night that the rain started. And they were with me all throughout the hurricane, and that was very interesting. I remember I finished watching an episode of The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu, and then the minute it finished, the lights were out. That was like 1 a.m. And like, it had been raining. I didn't think it was that severe at the moment. Throughout the course of the hurricane, going through the island, specifically going through San Juan, which was where I was, I remember trying to keep calm, trying to keep my parents calm, especially my dad. And then we also had our dogs inside. There were 4 chihuahuas inside the house. So that was definitely something. And at one point, after all the rain and all the wind, and I remember right behind my apartment, there was like this kind of forest area, and seeing all these trees just like lose the leaves, seeing like trees fall. And after a while, after it stopped raining and the wind, I went outside for a minute because my dad wanted to go outside, so I had to go out with him. And then when that happened, like, I saw how my area was. I saw trees in the floor. I saw like electricity poles on the floor. The electricity wires were all down. Like, that was something. And that day I said, like, okay, like, we're not moving here until I know that this is all over. The next morning, my parents decided to, like, first thing, they wanted to check on their house. They went, because we couldn't call my brother to check on their house. So they just left in the morning. Later I would find out that what normally would take like an hour to travel turned into like a 3 or 4 hour ordeal for them to get to their house. Luckily it was okay, but their neighbors' houses, when I went there, like 3 or 4 were gone. And I remember after they left, I said, I want to see what's happened here. So I got in my car, I started driving, and what would normally take me 15 minutes to just go around the area took me over 2 hours. Floodings, cables down, trees, people out, houses gone. I remember I lived very close to a town called Trujillo Alto, which is, I guess you could say, somewhat rural in comparison to its neighbor San Juan. And when I drove through this area, houses were gone. It was devastating. It took me, like, I said, okay, like, I remember saying, this is bad, but let's just wait to see how everything is. So I tried calling everyone. I had no phone service. I knew my parents were okay because they spent the night with me. I didn't know about the rest of my family. I didn't know about my brother, my grandparents, my uncles, my cousins, my friends. Um, and I think I stayed calm because I said, like, there's no point in worrying, but it wasn't the same for other people. When I finally got phone service, I like received messages, and I remember my uncle who lived in New Jersey at the time. He was trying to reach his daughters. He couldn't. He wanted me to go check on them. They lived over an hour away from me, and I remember saying, I am really sorry. I literally cannot drive there because one, like, for one thing, like, if I drive there, I'm gonna run out of gas, and I don't know where I'm gonna end up, and I don't know how things are going to be wherever I end up being stuck. I remember, like, after that, it was chaos. So roads were obstructed. Food, like, a lot of supermarkets ran out of food in a matter of 2 days at the most. It was really hard. I remember gas lines, like for gasoline. I remember one time I tried to get gas, and I spent, I think, 4 hours in a line to later find out that, like, 2 cars before me, they ran out of gas. So I couldn't get any gas. And I remember driving back home saying, I hope that my car doesn't run out of gas until I get home. The food thing was a big issue because we couldn't cook. At least I didn't have, like, a gas stove, so I was literally eating, like, canned food that I had. I started eating less meals, and I was in San Juan. I was kind of okay because I still had some resources around me. But I remember one day when I finally was able to speak to my parents, they were like, the army came and they were giving food, and we're grateful that they did this because we don't have anything else. I remember once going to my parents' house after a few weeks after the hurricane, and, like, going with my mom to do a line to get water. My brother, my brother and his wife, they were literally, like, washing their clothes in a river, which is something that you would never think that you would end up doing, ever. It was just the lack of communication, the lack of resources for a lot of people. It was crazy. I remember one morning I picked up a good friend of mine who's from Venezuela. She lived there, but she didn't have any family there. So I went with her. I picked her up at her house, and I'm like, okay, like, let's just go get food wherever we can find anything. And wherever we can find cash, because that's something a lot of people don't really know about what was happening. But there was no electricity, there was no internet, people ran out of cash. And it was horrible to see the lines of people trying to get money to buy whatever they could find. One time, my parents, they drove up to San Juan for over an hour. They risked running out of gas. They risked getting in trouble with the police because we were not supposed to be out after 6 p.m. Just to see if they could find money, so when they got back to see what food they could buy. And I remember, while all of this was happening, one day I walked into a thrift shop because I was trying to find a bicycle to ride around, and there was, like, they had, like, power plants, so they had the TV on, and while this was happening, and I don't want to get political, but I guess it's something that it really did affect me. Puerto Rico was in chaos days after the hurricane. On the TV, the only thing on national TV, because they had, like, U.S. TV on that channel, they were commenting on how the president was complaining about NFL players taking a stand, like taking a knee during the national anthem. And up to a certain point, I understand what they're trying to do. That's their thing. I get it. But there were 3.4 million American citizens who didn't have electricity, communications, food, water. And it was really upsetting to see how we weren't even, like, people didn't even know what was going on. I remember I saw that, and I think the next day I was able to find phone service, and I posted this a post on Facebook, and I was really upset, and I just posted it in English, and I said, "Friends from the U.S., I get that you have your own stuff going on, but we're also part of America. Like, we're citizens. We fight in the military. Right now, my little brother is in basic training in the Army. My father served in the Air Force. My oldest brother also served in the Army. Same for my uncle. So here we are, 3.4 million American citizens going through this, and the president is not acknowledging our problems, our situations. Like, yes, I get it. We don't get a vote, but we're still citizens. And regardless of whether we're citizens or not, we're human. And it was very shocking. And that was Puerto Rico. Like, we are the bigger island, like, that was affected. I don't want to even imagine how it was with the Virgin Islands, for example. I remember the night before I was watching, before the hurricane came, I was watching on Snapchat, like, our stories where you can see what's going on in other places. I was seeing how the hurricane was tearing through other islands. And I said, this is worrisome. Like, there we were, people without a way to solve a lot of our, or without, I don't want to say without a way to solve our problems, without assistance. Because there were a lot of incredible people who just, like, went out and did what they had to do to get everything working. I remember one time I went to stay at a friend's house because she had water and she had phone service, and we were close to a place where I could charge my phone. And I asked her about her boyfriend, and she's like, "Oh yeah, he's like out helping cut out some trees in front of, like, the university or something like that." And it was like, that's what was going on. Local government had this huge issue, just like trying to reach people. People were having to deal with their problems themselves, which, it's not easy when you are in a town in the mountains and you are maybe, there's, I don't know, probably a few teenagers and a few young adults caring for a larger pool of older citizens, because you probably live with your grandparents and you need to make sure that they're okay. Same for, like, I tend to think that I was well off in the sense that I was on my own. I only had to feed myself. But I remember talking to people who had husbands, wives, who had kids, and I remember saying, how are they doing this? How are they making sure that their kids have enough to eat? How are they keeping them entertained? Because, like, that's what they dealt with. And then, like, illnesses. I remember one of the reasons why I'm here, like, at this university, was because I noticed at one point, like, waterborne illnesses caused by bacteria, and illnesses that were unheard of basically in the island. where like people were dying from them. Mosquitoes were rampant. I remember a classmate of mine, he had a 2-year-old child, and she got, I can't remember if it was Zika or some mosquito-borne disease. That was one of the many repercussions that came after the hurricane. There has been a shift in mentality. There has been a greater effort on the behalf of people to be very proactive in solving whatever problem may come their way. There are people who lost everything. There are people who left the island. Like many of my friends who said they didn't want to come to the US because their families were there or because they didn't speak the language. They were forced out to leave after this situation happened. However, the fact that we have gone through so much has really shown us that you can only go up once you hit rock bottom. And ever since the hurricane, yes, a lot of problems have surfaced. I won't say that it's the same, because it's not. But there is a collective shift in mindset of who we are. There is a self-awareness that we're important and that we can do things just as anybody else. And people are noticing, hey, we should be treated as everyone else. Today, someone asked, after a hurricane, did people's mindsets start supporting more statehood or independence? I think it's irrelevant. I think that if there is one thing the world should know about Puerto Rico, is that regardless of what we think of our relationship with the U.S. should be, we are still human. We are still strong. We're making sure that we're not in a position again where we're so vulnerable. And I saw that in many ways. I remember people actually, like people my age and younger, actually paying attention to politics, because obviously politics affects this, both in Puerto Rico and the U.S. I remember people learning about emergencies, and I remember a lot of NGOs just like empowering people to do what they needed. I saw a lot of businesses that were created after the hurricane, both to just like maintain or recuperate some of what we had lost, but to prepare for the future. So if there's one thing that I would like the world to know about Puerto Rico, is that we're not done. We're keeping it moving. Like we're making things happen, and we're always open up for business.